Voyage2Go History. Life is a journey, being part of it is everything. Hello, my name is Jessica. Welcome to episode 3 of my historical travel podcast, Voyage2Go History, where I take you on the most adventurous journeys from the past that continue to shape our view of the world today. In this true story, 17-year-old German Georg Forster travels around the world with his father, a naturalist, in the 18th century aboard a sailing ship under the command of James Cook. Georg's travel narrative is written in the language of the 18th century. To make it more understandable, I have largely translated it into modern language. His knowledge is that of the late 18th century, so I will place some of his statements in context and provide additional information. What happened in the last episode?
In the last episode, we followed Georg Forster and the Resolution to Madeira on July 29, 1772. From the ship, they admired the city of Funchal with its whitewashed houses, vineyards, and fortified castles. On land, Georg noted the contrast between the city's picturesque appearance and its narrow, poorly paved streets. Exploring the island, they discovered chestnut forests, yam plantations, and bamboo-supported vineyards that produced Madeira's renowned wine. Georg also learned about the cultivation of Malvasia grapes, used for the island's finest sweet wine. As they departed, Georg reflected on the warmth and hospitality of Madeira's people, leaving the island with a deep appreciation for its beauty and culture.
Saturday, August 1st, 1772, Madeira, North Atlantic.
On the 1st of August, Georg Forster, aboard the Resolution along with the Adventure, set sail again late in the evening. A northeast wind greatly aided their journey, and by the early morning of the 4th of August, Palma came into view. This island, according to his astronomical calculations, is located at 28°38' north latitude and 17°58' west longitude. It belongs to the islands known in antiquity as the Fortunate Isles, one of which was already called Canary at that time. It is likely that not only the Canary Islands but also Madeira and Porto Santo were known to the people of antiquity, and assuming this, their various reports of the number of these islands can be easily explained. The Canary Islands were forgotten for a time until, towards the end of the 14th century, the spirit of navigation and exploration was revived. Some adventurers rediscovered them, and Biscay sailors landed, particularly on the island of Lanzarote, from which they took 177 natives. Louis de la Cerda, a Spanish nobleman from the royal family in Castile, obtained ownership rights to these islands through a papal bull, and starting in 1344, held the title of Prince of the Fortunate Islands, though he never truly took possession of them. They were visited again in 1402 by John, Baron of Bethencourt from Normandy. He took possession of some of them and called himself King of the Canary Islands. However, his grandson ceded all claims to Don Henrique, the Infante of Portugal, and eventually the islands were handed over to the Spaniards, who still own them today. The following day at 5 a.m., the two ships passed the island of Faro, which is notable because some geographers draw the first meridian through its westernmost point.
The prime meridian, also known as the zero meridian, is an imaginary line that divides the Earth into the eastern and western hemispheres. It runs through the Greenwich Observatory near London and was established as the global reference point for longitude at an international conference in 1884. In navigation, the prime meridian plays a crucial role. Using longitude and latitude, ships can determine their exact positions at sea. Combined with accurate chronometers, the prime meridian enables precise navigation and the creation of detailed nautical charts. These advancements revolutionized seafaring and greatly contributed to the exploration of the world's oceans.
After an astronomical observation conducted by Captain Cook, the western tip of the island was determined to be at 27 degree 42 north latitude and 18 degree 9 west longitude. On exactly this day, when they were approximately under the 27th parallel, they saw various flying fish, which were being chased by bonitos and dorados, rising above the water's surface. They flew in all directions, sometimes here, sometimes there, and not only against the wind. They also did not always fly in a straight line, but rather in curved paths. When they flew over the surface of the sea and encountered the tip of a wave, they passed directly through it and continued on the other side. From that time until they left the hot equator, they witnessed almost daily the spectacle of countless schools of these fish surrounding them. Sometimes a few were caught on the deck when, unfortunately for them, they had flown too far or soared too high and became exhausted. On August 8th, the seawater had a whitish hue, and since this change in color often indicates shallow waters, a sandbank or a rock, they prudently dropped the lead line and found no bottom at a depth of 50 fathoms.
The fathom is a nautical unit of measurement traditionally used to measure water depth. It originated from the Old English word fathom, meaning to embrace, referring to the span of outstretched arms. 1 fathom is equivalent to 6 feet or approximately 8.83 meters. For example, 50 fathoms is approximately 91.44 meters.
In the evening, they passed the Tropic of Cancer. Around this time, their books and equipment began to grow mold, and iron and steel started to rust in the open air. Due to the quality of the air, the captain had the ship carefully fumigated with powder and wine vinegar. It is highly likely that the air contained salt particles, as mere moisture or damp fumes do not cause such an effect. How the heavier salt particles could be lifted into the air dissolved in fumes, philosophers may explain. However, it would be especially interesting to investigate whether the many animal substances that decay daily in the sea produce a sufficient amount of volatile alkali to account for the observed phenomenon. The intense heat between the tropics seems to make the sea salt acids, which are present in both seawater and common salt, volatile. It has been observed, for example, that cloth soaked in dissolved alkali and hung over traditional salt pans form crystals of a mixed salt composed of hydrochloric acid and the alkali previously soaked. Therefore, it seems to follow that the sea salt acids become volatile due to the heat of these regions, and present in the fumes of the air, attack the surface of iron and steel. On the other hand, for the human body, which is greatly weakened by the heat of the hot equator, this must be highly beneficial, as inhaling it strengthens the lungs, and through its mild astringent effect on the skin, prevents excessive perspiration. Among the precautions and remedies for scurvy that the 2 ships had brought from England was also a concentrated beer essence. Beer wort or mash had been boiled down until the drink had the consistency of syrup. This was called beer essence or wort essence.
Scurvy is a disease caused by a deficiency of vitamin C, which is essential for the production of collagen, a protein vital for the stability of skin, blood vessels, and bones. Without sufficient vitamin C, symptoms like bleeding gums, tooth loss, joint pain, fatigue, and, in severe cases, death can occur. In the 18th century, scurvy was particularly common among sailors on long voyages, as their diets lacked of fresh fruits and vegetables. James Cook took innovative steps to prevent scurvy during his expeditions. He introduced sauerkraut as a primary remedy, as it was rich in vitamin C and could be preserved for long periods. Additionally, he experimented with wort, a type of malt extract containing vitamin C, and malt mash, a fermentation product. Fresh meat, citrus fruits, and other fresh provisions were also brought on board wherever possible. Thanks to Cook's efforts, his crew largely avoided scurvy, and his methods became a model for improving health and nutrition on naval voyages.
They had several barrels of this essence on board. However, even before leaving Madeira, it began to ferment, and now the barrels were bursting and leaking. The captain thought to remedy the problem by bringing it from the lower, warmer storage area to the deck, where it was cooler. However, the open air intensified the fermentation to such an extent that some barrels' bottoms were blown out. This happened every time with a bang, as if a gun had been fired, and a mist or vapor usually preceded the bang. On the advice of Georg's father, a fermenting barrel of this essence was transferred into a barrel that had been properly sulfured beforehand. This calmed the fermentation for a few days. However, after this period, it returned, especially in the barrels exposed to open air. Some barrels, buried below in the small ballast stones of the ship, fared better. At least they didn't burst. Perhaps the addition of doubly distilled brandy might have prevented further fermentation. Otherwise, the beer made from this wort, which was only prepared by adding warm water, was very good and drinkable. It only had a slightly smoky taste, which resulted from the boiling down process.
Tuesday, August 11, 1772, Boa Vista, Cape Verde.
On August 11th, they discovered Bonavista, one of the islands of the Green Cape. The following morning, as the weather cleared after a rain shower, they also saw the island of Mayo. Around noon, they finally approached the island of Santiago and anchored at 3 p.m. in the bay of Porto Praya. Early the next day, they went ashore and visited the commander at the fort, Don José de Silva, a kind-hearted man who spoke some French, and introduced them to the Governor-General of the Cape Verde Islands. This gentleman was Don Joaquim Salama Saldanha de Lobos. He usually resided in Santiago, the capital of the island, but as his pale complexion revealed, he had come here 2 months earlier, as the air was said to be healthier. He stayed in the rooms of the commander, who had meanwhile been relegated to a shabby hut, and provided them with some information about these islands. Antonio Noli, also known as Antoniotto, was a man from Genoa who worked for Don Henrique, the Prince of Portugal. In 1449, he discovered several islands and landed on one of them on May 1st, which was later named Mayo. At the same time, he discovered Santiago. In 1460, he undertook another journey to claim the islands, establish a colony, and settle there officially. During this journey, the other islands were fully discovered. Santiago is the largest island, and its capital, of the same name, is located inland and serves as the seat of the bishop. The entire island is divided into 11 parishes, with the most populous containing around 4,000 houses, meaning that overall the population is relatively sparse. Porto Praya is situated on a steep rock, which they ascended via a winding footpath. On the seaside, the fortifications consist of old crumbling walls, and on the land side they are merely a mound of loose stones, barely knee-high. Near the fort, there is a fairly decent building that belongs to a group of merchants from Lisbon who hold a trade monopoly for these islands and maintain an agent here for that purpose. As they wished to buy some fresh provisions, the governor directed them to the agent. However, this man was very lazy, promising them everything they requested, but ultimately providing nothing more than a single thin ox. The trading company in question tyrannizes the poor inhabitants, selling them the worst goods at outrageous prices. Santiago has few inhabitants, who are of average size and almost entirely black. They appear to be of African descent. Mr. Canonicus Pau of Xanten seems to assume that they are descendants of the first Portuguese settlers, and over 9 generations, or roughly 300 years, they have acquired their current black color, which, however, Forster found to be much darker than described. Whether this color is merely the result of the heat of the hot land, or if it was instead caused by intermarriage with Africans from the neighboring African coast, Forster does not wish to decide. However, Count Buffon strongly asserts that the color of humans primarily depends on the climate. Be that as it may, there are now very few white people among them, and Georg believed that including the governor, the commander, and the trade agent, they did not see more than 5 or 6 of them. In some of these islands, even the governors and priests are black. The nobility wear old, worn European clothing, which they exchanged long before the establishment of the monopolizing trading company. The others are content with individual items of clothing, such as a shirt, trousers, or a hat, and seem to be quite satisfied with their attire as it is. The women wear only a striped cotton cloth over their shoulders, which hangs down to the knees at the front and back. The children go completely naked until they reach puberty. Due to the despotism of the governors, the leadership of the superstitious priests, and the negligence of the Portuguese government, this people are truly in even more wretched conditions than the black populations in Africa. These obstacles will continually prevent them from spreading and multiplying, even though the true wealth of a country lies in its population. It is natural for the inhabitants of such a hot land to tend toward laziness, but this tendency is reinforced when they know that all efforts to improve their situation will only make them more tormented and unhappy. With grim indifference, they therefore resign themselves to begging as the only condition that can protect them from the greedy claws of their tyrannical masters. Why should they work at the expense of their rest and sleep, knowing that the reward will not benefit them but only increase the wealth of others? Dreary prospects, which show no hope for happiness, are certainly not an incentive for marriage. The difficulties in finding a meager livelihood provide sufficient reasons to avoid household and family responsibilities. In the evening, they returned to the ship. They had to wade through the water naked because the waves were higher. While doing so, they carried water barrels and provisions. There was concern about sharks, which were numerous in this harbor. The captains, astronomers, and pilots had spent the day conducting astronomical observations on a small island in the harbor, also known as Quail Island. Officers of a French frigate had also conducted observations there some time before. The next day, Captain Cook invited the Governor-General and the commander for lunch. Since the governor could not attend due to seasickness, they were represented on board. The commander had promised to come but forgot to ask permission from the governor right away. Meanwhile, the governor had gone to sleep, and no one dared disturb him. Since there were not many fresh provisions in Porto Praya, they could not stay any longer. Their harvest consisted of semi-salty water, a lean ox, some long-legged goats, scrawny pigs, turkeys, chickens, as well as unripe oranges and inferior bananas. On botanical walks, they discovered tropical plants, mostly familiar species. However, among the insects, fish, and birds, there were some new species. The crew bought about 15 to 20 green monkeys, known as sao jago, or green monkeys. They were smaller than cats and had a greenish-brown color with black heads and paws. The antics of these creatures were entertaining as long as they were new, but soon people grew tired of them. Some monkeys survived the cruel treatment and were brought alive to the captain. In the evening, they sailed south. The weather remained mild with rain showers, and the wind blew from various northeastern directions. On the evening of the 16th, they saw a bright, fiery meteor that quickly fell towards the horizon and disappeared in a northwestern direction. Although they were at least 55 nautical miles away from Sao Jago, a swallow continued to follow the ship. In the following days, they saw many bonitos around them, but all attempts to catch them were unsuccessful. A shark, 1.5 meters long, was eventually caught and used for food. 2 days later, Henry Smock, one of the carpenters, went missing. He had been working on the outside of the ship and seemed to have fallen into the water. Due to his kind and calm nature, he was greatly missed by his fellow crew members, a clear sign that his loss must have been particularly painful for his family. In the eyes of the sensitive, here and there, a hidden tear was seen, as a recognition of a reasonable fellow human being who was good and loving.
This concludes the third part of Georg Forster's journey around the world aboard the HMS Resolution under the command of James Cook. I have linked a map of the locations of this episode in the show notes. For those who would like to see the locations of the journey around the world in the present day, I recommend my YouTube channel, Voyage2Go. There, I visit the places from Georg Forster's travel narrative and try to uncover traces and connections between today and the past. So that was episode 3 of our journey around the world with Georg Forster, Captain Cook, and the Resolution, on which we will continue our travels together in the coming weeks. I hope we can travel a little further together, because life is a journey. Being part of it is everything.